I'd buried one wife under the cottonwood at the top of my south pasture, and I'd made my peace with dying the same way I'd lived the last 6 years, alone, with the wind for company and the cattle for conversation. So when I say a woman came to Little Sky one October afternoon and undid all of that, understand it wasn't a thing I went looking for. It came the way weather comes on the high plains. You see it standing off on the horizon, dark and certain, and you tell yourself you've got time. And then it's on you, and it changes the whole shape of the country. Her name was Della Hartwell, and the first thing she ever said to me was a warning. She stepped down off Emmett Shaw's freight wagon at the end of my lane with a carpetbag in one hand and her girl's wrist in the other, and she looked at me, and she looked at the house, and she looked at the barn and the corrals and the smoke standing up straight out of the chimney in the cold, still air, and I watched her add it all up like a column of figures. Then she said, "Mr. Rourke, I'll tell you plain so we don't waste each other's time. I've been married to a charming man before, and I've been cheated by 2 others since, and I don't believe in a fair bargain anymore. So whatever the catch is in all this, you'd best say it now." I stood there with my hat in my hands, and I didn't rightly know what to answer. "There's no catch, ma'am," I said. She smiled at that, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of somebody who'd heard that exact sentence before and paid for believing it. "There's always a catch," she said. "I just haven't found yours yet." The girl beside her was maybe 8 years old, pale from the long ride, with her mother's dark eyes and none of her mother's armor. She was staring at the barn cat sunning itself on the woodpile like it was the finest thing she'd ever seen. Her name was June. She hadn't said a word, but she'd been watching me too, and there was a question in her face that had nothing to do with catches or bargains. It was the plain, hungry look of a child sizing up whether a place might be safe. That look did something to me I hadn't expected. I'd like to tell you I married Della Hartwell out of some grand feeling, but that would be its own kind of lie, and I've told you enough of this story now to warn you I mean to tell it straight. The truth is plainer and less flattering to both of us. I'd written to a marriage agency out of Cheyenne the previous spring because the winters had gotten long, because the house had gone quiet in a way that no amount of work could fill, and because a man who owns 400 acres and a good herd and can't cook a meal past beans and bad coffee begins to feel the foolishness of it. Della had answered because her second husband had died owing money she'd never known about, because the men who came to collect it looked at her the way wolves look at a lamed calf, and because a girl of 8 needs a roof that won't be pulled out from under her. It was, in short, a bargain, a plain one. She'd keep my house and I'd keep her safe, and whatever else grew between us, if anything did, could grow in its own time or not at all. That was the arrangement I'd written, in my own bad hand, and that was the arrangement she'd come to hold me to. I understood later why she couldn't believe it. We were married 3 days after she arrived, by a circuit preacher named Bell who came through Cottonwood Bend the second Sunday of each month. It was a short ceremony in the front room of the parsonage with Emmett Shaw and his wife standing witness, and Della wore a gray dress that had been mended more times than it had been new, and she held herself through the whole of it the way you'd hold yourself walking out onto ice you don't trust. When Belle asked her the question, she was quiet a moment too long, and I saw Mrs. Shaw's eyes come up worried. Then Della said, "I will," in a voice as flat and even as a fence rail, and it was done. Outside, in the cold, she turned to me before I could hand her up into the wagon. "I'll do my part," she said. "I'll keep your house and I'll cook your meals and I'll not shame you in this town. But I'll tell you now, Mr. Rourke, I'll be watching. I've had good men turn bad and I've had bad men pretend to be good, and I can't tell the difference anymore until it's too late. So I'll watch. Don't take it personal." "I won't," I said. And I didn't. That's the thing I want you to understand about that first winter. She spent it waiting for me to turn into a monster, and I never once held it against her because I'd seen the ledger of her life by then, and I understood that a woman doesn't come by that kind of watching cheaply. Somebody teaches it to her. Somebody teaches it to her over years, one broken promise at a time, until watching is the only thing that's ever kept her safe. I decided, driving her home that first married evening with the girl asleep against her shoulder and the last light going purple off the Laramie Hills, that I would simply be what I was. I wouldn't try to prove anything. I'd just be a plain man doing plain things day after day, and if she never came to believe it, then at least she and the girl would be warm and fed and safe, and that was worth doing on its own account. I didn't know yet how long a winter can be, when somebody's counting your every kindness for the poison in it. The house at Little Sky was a good house. My father had built the first room of it, and I'd added the rest with my own hands over the years. But it had gone to a bachelor's kind of shabby, and Della said about it the first full day like a woman waging a war. She scrubbed the floors and beat the rugs and boiled the curtains and reorganized my whole kitchen, so that for a week I couldn't find a spoon. She worked from before light to after dark, and she worked hard, and there was no joy in any of it that I could see. It was the working of a person paying down a debt she believed she owed. I tried that first week to tell her to ease up, that there was no hurry, that the house had stood in its shabbiness a good while and could stand a few more days. She stopped scrubbing and looked up at me from the floor with her sleeves pushed past her elbows and her hair come loose around her face, and there was something almost like triumph in her eyes. "There it is," she said. "There's what? You want me to stop working?" She sat back on her heels. "Now we'll see the real bargain. You want a wife who sits pretty and doesn't earn her keep, is that it? And then in a month or two you'll have your grievance ready-made. She doesn't pull her weight, she's a burden, and won't the town understand when you—" She stopped herself. Her jaw tightened. "I know how this goes, Mr. Rourke." I stood in the doorway a long moment. "Mrs. Rourke," I said, and she flinched a little at the name, at being called it, and I noted that and set it aside. "I told you to ease up because you've been at it 14 hours and you'll wear yourself sick, and a sick woman can't enjoy a clean house any more than a dirty one. That's the whole of it. There's no second half to that sentence. Work as much or as little as suits you. It's your house now, too." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign tongue. Then she went back to scrubbing, harder than before, and she didn't answer, and I understood that I had failed some test I hadn't known I was taking, not by being cruel, but by not being cruel in the way she'd braced for. It confused her. A cruelty she could have filed away as proof, kindness she had no drawer for. That was how the whole of it went, those first weeks. I'd leave a portion of the household money on the shelf by the door each Monday, the way I'd said I would, and she'd count it twice and write the sum in a little cloth-bound ledger she kept, and then she'd write down every penny she spent against it, and once a week she'd lay the ledger open on the table where I couldn't miss it, waiting for me to check her figures, to accuse her of skimming, to catch her out. I never checked it. After a while, I think that was worse for her than checking would have been. She cooked well, better than well, once she'd gotten the measure of my stove. And the first good meal she set in front of me, a venison stew with dumplings light as anything, I ate 2 bowls and told her it was the finest supper I'd had under that roof in 6 years, which was the plain truth. She watched me say it with her hands folded in her lap and her food untouched, hunting my face for the mockery in it. "You don't have to flatter me," she said. "I'm not." "My first husband flattered me," she said. "Roland. He could make you feel like the sun rose in your face. He told me I was the smartest woman he'd ever met, right up until I found out he'd smart-talked me into signing away my father's land for his schemes. Flattery's just the grease on the trap, Mr. Rourke. The prettier the words, the worse what comes after." I set down my spoon. "Then I'll try to say fewer pretty things," I said, "and hope you'll judge me by duller measures. The wood's cut, the stove draws, the roof's tight. You're warm and the girl's warm, and neither of you owes anybody anything. Those aren't words. You can go and touch every one of them." She didn't answer that either. But that night, after she thought I was asleep, I heard her in the kitchen, and I got up quiet and looked, and she was standing at the window with the ledger closed under her arm, just looking out at the dark yard and the barn and the stars, and there was something on her face I didn't have a name for. It wasn't happiness. It was more like a person standing at the edge of a thing they want and are afraid to want, because wanting is how you get hurt. I went back to bed and left her to it. Some thaws you can't hurry, you just have to keep the fire lit and wait. The girl came around first. Children always do. They haven't yet learned all the reasons to be afraid. June had been a silent, watchful little thing those first days, keeping close to her mother's skirts, saying little, eating like she expected the plate taken away. But there was that barn cat, and there was the old dun mare I kept for gentle work, and there was the whole enormous new world of a ranch, and a child can't stay frightened of a place that keeps offering her wonders. It was the calf that did it. We had a late calf that fall, born small and poorly to a first-time heifer who wouldn't own it, and I brought it into the barn to keep it from freezing and to see if I could get it started on a bottle. June found me at it the second morning, kneeling in the straw with the little thing across my knees, coaxing the nipple into its mouth, and she stood in the barn door with her eyes gone wide as saucers. "Is it dying?" she asked, first real words she'd spoken to me. "Not if I can help it," I said. "Its mama wouldn't take it. Happens sometimes. So we've got to be its mama instead till it's strong." She crept closer, one careful step at a time, the way you'd approach a wild thing you feared might bolt. "Can I see?" I shifted so she could. She reached out one small finger and touched the calf's damp, curly forehead. And the calf, being a calf and not caring one whit for anybody's history of being cheated, turned its head and started sucking on her fingers, mistaking them for the bottle, and June made a sound, half a laugh, half a shriek. That was the first entirely happy sound I'd heard out of her. "It's tickly." "That's hunger," I said. "That's a thing that wants to live hanging on hard. You want to try the bottle." She looked at me and then she looked back toward the house, toward her mother, out of some instinct to check whether this was allowed, whether it was safe, whether it was a trap. And then she decided, I saw her decide it, that a hungry calf in a warm barn was a thing she could trust, and she knelt down in the straw beside me in her good dress her mother would scold her over later, and she took the bottle in both hands, and she fed the calf. Her name for it was Buttons, on account of a spot on its nose. She fed it morning and evening the whole rest of that winter, and it followed her around the barnyard like a dog come spring. And long before her mother would let herself believe in me, that girl believed in that calf, and through the calf, a little in the place, and through the place, a little in me. Della watched all of it with a face I was learning to read now. It wasn't distrust anymore, not aimed at June's happiness. It was worse, in a way. It was fear. Because a mother who's been cheated learns that the cruelest trick a false man plays is on the children. He wins the child first, makes himself beloved, and then when he turns, the child breaks worst of all. I understood that Della was watching her daughter fall in love with a calf in a barn in a quiet man's patient hands, and that every ounce of that love was, to her, one more hostage the world could take. She came to me about it, finally, one evening after June was abed. She'd waited until then. She never fought in front of the girl. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't win her." Her voice was low and hard, and there was a shake underneath it she was fighting to keep down. She's had enough men be sweet to her and then vanish. Her own father, Roland, she worshipped him, and he'd forget she was alive for weeks and then swan back in with a peppermint stick, and she'd forgive him everything. And then he died and left us with nothing and men coming to the door, and she cried herself sick for a father who never once put us first. I won't have it again. So whatever you're doing with the calf and the horse and the patience, if it's for show, if it's to soften me by way of her, then stop it. Be cold to her if you have to. Just don't teach her to love you and then take it away. That's the one thing I'll not forgive. She was crying by the end of it, though she'd have died before admitting it, standing there in the lamplight with her fists clenched and the tears standing in her eyes and not falling, held back by pure will. I thought a good while before I answered. It mattered what I said. I could feel that it mattered. "Mrs. Rourke," I said finally, "Della, I can't promise you I won't die. No man can. My first wife would tell you that if she could, and my daughter would too if she'd lived past a week. I lost them both one winter, the fever and then the birth, and I know as well as any man walking that you can't promise anybody you'll stay, because staying isn't always up to us." Her face changed at that. She hadn't known about them. It wasn't in any letter. "But I can promise you this," I went on. "I will never teach that child to love me and then choose to leave. I'll never put anything ahead of her, not money, not pride, not my own comfort. If I'm ever taken from this place, it'll be by God or by dying, not by walking out the door with a bag. And I know that promise isn't worth much to you yet because you've heard promises before and they were all lies. So don't believe it. Just watch it. Watch me for a year, 10 years. Words are cheap and I know it. So don't take my word, take the calf. Take the woodpile. Take every plain day you can hold in your 2 hands. And someday, when you've counted enough of them, maybe you'll find you don't have to watch so hard." She stood there a long moment. Then she wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, rough, angry at herself for the tears, and she said, "That was pretty. You said you'd stop saying pretty things." "I did," I admitted. "I couldn't help it that once." And for just a flicker, the first time, the corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. But it was the country a smile might come from someday, and I went to bed that night more hopeful than I'd been in 6 years, over a thing so small as the corner of a hard woman's mouth. Then the winter came down on us in earnest, and taught us both something. The first big storm hit the second week of December, and it was a bad one, the kind of blizzard that walls off the whole world in white, and makes a rope strung from house to barn the only thing between a man and dying 40 feet from his own door. I'd known it was coming. You learn to read the sky out here or you don't last. I'd brought the cattle down to the near pasture and broken the ice on the tank and cut extra wood and strung my ropes, and when it came screaming down out of the north, I was as ready as a man gets. But cattle in a blizzard are a stupid drifting thing, and on the third day, when the wind eased for an hour, I found a dozen head had pushed through a weak place in the north fence and gotten themselves into the coulee, where the snow was drifting deep enough to bury them. I had to go after them. There was no choice in it. 12 head was a good part of the year's profit, and more than that, they'd die slow and suffering down there, and I don't leave an animal to that if I can help it. Della met me at the door as I was pulling on my heaviest coat. "You're not going out in that." "Wind's dropped. I've got maybe 2 hours before it comes back. I can get them if I go now." 12 cows, she said, "against your life." "It's not that dramatic," I said, which wasn't entirely true. "I know this ground blind. I'll take the ropes and the dun. I'll be back before dark." She looked at me, and I saw her doing that old arithmetic again, but it was a different sum this time. She was afraid, not the wary, watching fear, a plain, human, cold-in-the-belly fear that a person might not come back. "And if you're not," she said, "if you go down in that coulee and the storm comes back and you don't come back, what happens to us then? To June and me? Snowed in here, no man, no money we can get to, a dead husband we buried 3 weeks after we wed. You think I haven't seen exactly that happen to a woman? You'd be doing to me the very thing you swore you wouldn't. Leaving, just dressed up as bravery." That stopped me, coat half buttoned. Because she was right, in a way I hadn't looked at. A good deed can be a selfish one. A man can ride off to be a hero and call it duty when the truer duty is at home, keeping himself alive for the people who'd starve without him. I'd been a bachelor so long I'd forgotten I was worth more alive to somebody than any dozen cows. "You're right," I said, and I saw the surprise of it hit her that I'd said it plain, that I'd yielded. "I'll take the near ones only, the 3 in the coulee mouth I can reach on foot with the rope, and leave the 9 deep in it to God and the drifts. And I'll turn back the second the wind so much as whispers about coming up. That's the bargain I'll make you. Not the 12, not my neck, just what I can reach and get home from." She held my eyes a moment. You mean it? I mean it. I'd rather lose 9 cows than teach you were right about me all over again. I got the 3 and I was back inside the hour, half frozen and empty-handed of the rest, and the storm came howling back down not 20 minutes after I'd stripped the harness off the dun, so hard I couldn't see the barn from the house. We lost the 9. Come the thaw I found them in the drifts, and it was a hard loss, real money. But that night, shivering by the stove with Della pressing a hot cup into my hands and June asleep and safe in the next room and the whole world screaming white outside, I caught her looking at me, and there was a thing in her face I'll not forget as long as I live. She'd asked me to choose them over the cattle, and I had. And I think it was the first time in a very long time that anybody had done a single thing she asked, purely because she'd asked it, not for their own reasons. Not because it suited them, because she'd asked, and her asking was reason enough. Thank you, she said, very quiet, for coming back. Told you I would. You told me a lot of things, but there was no bite in it now. She sat down across from me, and for a while neither of us said anything, and the fire popped, and the storm raged, and it was, I'll say the word, though it seems too large, it was peaceful. The 2 of us and the sleeping girl and the warm room in the white roaring dark, a little island of a home. Roland would have gone for the 12, she said suddenly, staring at the fire. Not for the cows. For the story, so he could ride into the saloon and tell how he braved the blizzard and saved his whole herd, and everybody'd buy him a drink, and I'd be home not knowing if I was a widow. He loved the story of himself more than he loved anything real. She turned the cup in her hands. You lost 9 cows, and there's no story in that. Nobody'll buy you a drink for the 9 you left, and you did it anyway. Cows aren't worth a story, I said. You and the girl are worth coming home to. That's the whole of my arithmetic, Della. It's not complicated. I know it feels like it must be, because the men you knew made everything complicated so you couldn't see the theft in it. But some things are just as simple as they look. She was quiet a long moment. I don't know how to believe that, she said, and it wasn't hard when she said it. It was almost pleading, the confession of a person who wants to and can't. I want to. I'm so tired of watching. You've no idea how tired a body gets, watching every hour of every day, waiting for the axe. But every time I start to set the watching down, I remember the last time I set it down, and how much it cost me, and I pick it back up. It's not you. I want you to know it's not you. It's that I don't trust the ground to hold anymore. Any ground. I know, I said. And I did. I reached across, slow, and I put my hand over hers where it held the cup just for a moment, and I felt her go still, not pulling away, but braced, waiting to see what the touch would cost her. And then I took my hand back, because I wanted her to know it came without a price, that it wasn't the down payment on anything, that a hand could just be a hand offered in the cold and then withdrawn, asking nothing. Take your time, I said. The ground'll hold. It'll still be holding tomorrow and the day after. There's no hurry in it. We've got all winter. She looked at the place where my hand had been. All winter, she said. We had more of winter than we'd bargained for, and in the middle of it came the test I hadn't seen riding toward us, and it came wearing the face of Della's old life. His name was Turk Amsel, and he'd been Roland Hartwell's partner in the schemes that had ruined Della the first time, and he rode into the yard on a spent horse on a gray afternoon in late January, with the look of a man who'd tracked something a long way and meant to have it. I was in the barn when he came, and I heard the horse, and I came out to find Della standing frozen on the porch with her hand at her throat, and all the color gone out of her face, and June half hidden behind her skirts, and I knew before a word was spoken that this was somebody from the bad years. Well, Amsel said, swinging down, Della Hartwell, or is it Della something else now? I heard in town you'd landed yourself a rancher, moved up in the world. You're not welcome here, Turk, she said, her voice shook. Now that's no way to greet an old friend. He was a smooth one, I'll give him that. Well dressed for the country, a town coat, a smile like a card sharp's, The kind of man who's learned that most trouble can be talked past if you just keep smiling. I've come a long way and I'm cold and I've a matter of business with you. Simple thing. Won't take a minute. His eyes slid to me. This the rancher. I'm her husband, I said, Gideon Rourke, and you're standing in my yard. Rourke? He said it like he was filing it. Well, Mr. Rourke, then this concerns you too, seeing as a man's responsible for his wife's debts, and your wife owes me a considerable sum. Her late husband Roland, God rest him, and I had a venture together, a freighting concern, and when he passed he left the debts of it, and by the law of partnership those debts passed to his widow. $600 near enough. I've the paper on it. He patted his coat. I'm a reasonable man. I don't expect it all today, but I do expect us to come to an understanding. $600 was a crushing sum. It was more than the 9 cows and then some. It was a real bite out of everything I had. And I could see, watching Della, that the number landed on her like a blow because it was the old nightmare exactly. A man at the door with a paper and a smile, come to take the roof. But I could also see, plain as print, that the man was lying. I'd done business in that country 20 years. I knew the freight men. There was no concern of Roland Hartwell's that anybody had ever heard of, and a real debt $600 deep would have papers filed and lawyers behind it, not a lone man riding in on a broken-down horse to squeeze a widow in her kitchen. This was a vulture come to pick at a woman he'd reckoned was alone and frightened and easy. He hadn't counted on a husband. Now he was deciding quick whether the husband could be run past too. Here is the moment I want to tell you about most carefully, because it's the whole of what this story is. Everything in me wanted to take that man by his town collar and throw him off my land and tell him if he ever showed his face again, I'd feed it to him. That's the response a hard frontier man is supposed to have, and I felt it hot in my chest. But I looked at Della, and I saw that she was watching not Amsel, me. She was watching me in that old terrible way, waiting to learn who I really was. And I understood something in that instant that I've never forgotten, that how I handled this was going to be the thing that decided her, one way or the other forever. If I bulleted, if I met the lie with a fist and a shout, then I'd be just one more man who solved things by being frightening, and she'd file me under all the rest, a hard man, dangerous to be watched. But if I met it honest and steady, without cruelty and without fear, then maybe, she'd finally see the difference she'd told me she couldn't see. Between a good man and a bad one wearing good clothes. So I didn't throw him off my land. Mr. Amsel, I said, easy as I could, you say you've the paper, I'd like to see it. That checked him. A bully expects bluster. He doesn't know what to do with quiet. He blinked, and then he recovered his smile and reached into his coat and drew out a folded document, and he held it out, and I took it and read it slow, and it was exactly the crude forgery I'd expected. A partnership agreement in a clumsy hand, no notary seal, no filing stamp. A signature meant to be Roland's that Della, glancing at it, could tell you in a heartbeat was nothing like his. That's not Roland's hand, she said low. Now grief plays tricks on the memory, Amsel started. It's a good forgery, I said, but it's a forgery. There's no seal. There's no filing. A debt this size, if it were real, you'd have taken to a court in Cheyenne 2 years ago and had the sheriff serve it, not carried it around in your coat to spring on a widow in her kitchen. You didn't do that because you can't, because it isn't real. You heard Roland Hartwell died leaving a scared woman behind, and you reckon you could frighten $600 out of her before anybody looked close. That's the whole of your business here. The smile went off him then, all at once, and what was under it was ugly. You calling me a liar in my own. You're in my yard, I said, still quiet, so no, it's not your own anything. And yes, I'm calling you a liar. But I'm not going to fight you over it, and I'm not going to have you hurt or dragged or run off cruel, because you're not worth my hands, and my wife has seen enough men solve things with their hands to last her a lifetime. I folded the forged paper and handed it back to him. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Amsel. You're going to get back on that poor horse. which I'll feed and water before you go, because I don't punish a horse for its rider, and you're going to ride into Cottonwood Bend. And if you think you've got a real claim, you're going to take it to Judge Weatherby, who holds court there the first Monday of the month, and you're going to file it proper. And I'll be there to answer it with my lawyer, who'll want to know how a partnership no freight man in this territory ever heard of came to be worth $600. And if you'd rather not do that, if you'd rather not stand up in a real court with that paper, then you're going to ride on out of this country and not come back. Either way, nobody's going to lay a hand on you, and nobody's going to give you $1. That's the whole of my answer. He stood there. I could see him working it, weighing whether to bluster, whether to threaten, whether there was any play left. But I'd taken it all away from him. He'd come for a frightened woman and found a man who wasn't frightened, who wouldn't be baited into a fight that might have mudded things, who'd simply told the truth out loud, plain in front of everybody, and offered him the one thing a liar can't stand, a fair court and the light of day. He rode on. I fed and watered his horse first, as I'd said I would, and he watched me do it with a sour, baffled look, like a man who'd never in his life seen kindness spent on him and didn't know what it meant. Then he was gone down the lane, small and getting smaller, and the yard was quiet again, and the winter afternoon closed back over us gray and still. I turned around, and Della was standing on the porch where she'd stood the whole time, and she was looking at me, and she was crying, really crying now, no holding it back, the tears running down and her not even trying to wipe them. "Della," I said, alarmed. "It's all right, he's gone, he'll not come back, and if he does, he'll get the same. You're safe, you and June both, he can't touch you." "That's not," she pressed her hand to her mouth, "that's not why I'm." She came down off the porch, and she stood in front of me in the cold, close, and she looked up into my face like she was seeing it for the first time. "You could have hit him," she said. "You wanted to, I saw it. And you'd have been in the right, and no one would have blamed you, and it would have felt good, and you didn't. You just told the truth, out loud, and made it so plain there was nowhere for the lie to hide." Her voice broke. "Roland would have made a deal with him, split it, cheated him back, some clever thing. My second husband would have hidden behind me, let them collect off me, and called it my mess to clean. Every man I ever knew would have made it worse one way or another to serve himself. And you just stood there and told the truth and were kind to his horse." She laughed, wet and helpless. "You were kind to his horse, Gideon." "Horse didn't do anything wrong," I said, which set her laughing and crying harder both. And then she did a thing I hadn't expected, would never have asked for. She stepped in against me, into my arms, and put her face against my coat, and let herself be held in the cold yard, with June watching wide-eyed from the porch. And I stood there stunned as a poleaxe steer, and then slow, careful, like I might spook her. I put my arms around her and held on. "I've been so tired," she said into my coat. "So tired of watching, and I keep waiting for the thing that proves I was right to, and it doesn't come. You keep not being it. You keep just being this. And I don't know how much longer I can keep my guard up against a man whose whole crime is being exactly what he said he was." She pulled back and looked up at me, and there was something new in her face, something I'd been waiting all winter to see and had stopped hoping for. "I think I'm going to have to stop watching," she said, "and just let the ground hold. And it terrifies me, but I think I'm going to do it anyway." "The ground'll hold," I said. My voice wasn't as steady as I'd have liked. "I'm starting to believe you," she said. That was the day the winter turned, though the snow lay deep another 6 weeks. Weather's like that. The cold hangs on long past the moment the season's already decided which way it's going. I'll not stretch out the rest, because the best part of a story like ours isn't the drama. We'd had our drama, and there wasn't much more of it. The best part is the plain days, the ones Della had told me she couldn't count on, and slowly, that spring began to. She stopped laying the ledger open on the table for me to check. One day I noticed it wasn't there anymore, and I asked her about it easy, and she colored a little and said she'd stopped keeping it so close, that she reckoned she didn't need to write down every penny anymore, and that was its own kind of declaration, from a woman like her. She'd been keeping accounts against the day she'd have to prove she hadn't stolen from a man who'd accuse her. And now she'd set the accounts down because she'd decided the accusation wasn't coming. It was one of the largest things she ever said to me, and she said it by not doing something anymore. June named the spring calves in the barn Cat's kittens and grew brown and strong and loud in a way she hadn't been that pale, silent October. And she took to calling me by my given name. And then one day in April, out of nowhere over supper, she called me something else, quiet, testing it, and Della's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and mine did too, and June looked between us frightened she'd done wrong. And Della set down her fork and reached over and squeezed the girl's hand and said, "That's right, sweetheart. That's exactly right," and looked at me across the table with her eyes shining. And I had to get up and go stand at the window a minute because a grown man crying at his own supper table is a thing that wants some managing. We were married, in fact, before we were married in feeling. That was the odd shape of it, the shape a marriage of convenience takes. And I never once pushed at that door, never asked for more than she offered, because I'd have waited 10 years rather than have her come to me out of anything but her own free choosing. And in the end she came to it herself, in her own time, the way she'd done everything. There was an evening late that spring, warm, the window open and the frogs going down by the creek and June long abed, and Della came and sat beside me on the porch step, close. And after a while she leaned her head against my shoulder, the first time of her own accord, and we sat there in the dark not saying anything. And it was the most married I have ever felt to another living soul. That silence, that weight of her head, that choosing. "I want to tell you something," she said finally, "and I want you to know I mean it because I know how you feel about pretty words." "Tell me plain, then." "I came here sure you were too good to be true," she said. "Everyone in Cottonwood Bend told me so, the Shaws, the preacher, everybody said, 'Oh, you're a lucky woman, Gideon Rourke's the best man in the valley.' And every one of them saying it made me trust it less because I knew that a man that good was a mask, and the better the mask the worse the face behind it, and I was going to be the one who found out. I spent all winter waiting to find out, waiting for the lie." She turned her face up to me in the dark. "And I finally found it out, Gideon. Here's the lie. The lie is that there's always a lie. That's the thing that cost me half my life, believing that kindness is always the front of a swindle, that the ground never holds, that no good thing is real. That was the lie. And you're the one who showed me it was a lie by just being plainly, boringly, unremarkably good day after day, until I ran out of ways to disbelieve it." She laughed softly. "You're not too good to be true. You're just good and true. It's the simplest thing in the world, and it took me 31 years and a whole hard winter to learn to see it." I didn't have any pretty words for that. I'm not sure there are any. "I'm glad you stayed long enough to see it," I said, which was as plain as I could make it. "So am I," she said, and she took my hand, she took mine this time, her choosing, her reaching. And we sat there on the porch of the home we'd made out of a plain bargain in a hard winter and a stubborn woman's slow, brave decision to trust the ground again. And I thought about my first wife under the cottonwood, and I felt her blessing on it somehow, the way you do, and I thought, a man can be given more than one life if he lives long enough and keeps the fire lit. I'd made my peace with dying alone. And here instead was a woman's hand in mine and a girl asleep in the next room who called me by a name I'd never thought to hear again, and a whole spring coming green up out of the hard ground, and every bit of it real, and none of it a trick, and all of it ours. She'd waited all winter for the lie. I'm glad, every day I've got left, that she waited long enough to learn there wasn't one.